Hello everybody, here we are today kind of doing a first round series preview for the Eastern Conference and just having a little bit of fun with it. I originally had said that we were going to do all the playoffs together in the first round as a series preview. I decided I don't really like editing, so I wanted to break it up into two videos. You guys get to watch two videos over the course of 2 days instead, and I think maybe we'll all be happier with that. So that being said, let's get on into it. So kicking it off, you have the series against the Buffalo Sabres and the Boston Bruins. Buffalo is a very exciting team. They snapped the longest playoff drought in the NHL dating back to 2011, and they have been very, very fun for a variety of reasons. So to kick off the year, they didn't have the best record, and then basically when everybody thought it might be over yet again, they go out and have an incredible run from like mid-December through the end of the regular season. They post the best record, I believe, in the NHL in terms of points percentage. This is a team that not only made the playoffs, but won their division. And on top of that, too, they have just been so exciting. They have been one of the best scoring teams in the league. They are a side that I think in this series poses a big threat, as the offensive group could put up 5 goals in a game easily. And I think that's what you're going to have to watch out for if you're the Bruins. Now, I do think one of the things that could have helped the Sabres in this series would have been goalie depth, or just having the ability to switch out if you needed to. But it looks like UPL will probably have to start this series, if not complete the series, as Lyon is injured. At the end of the day, though, for this team, it's not necessarily just about this season and this series in particular. I am really excited to see it, don't get me wrong, but I also want to see if they can replicate it next year. However, a young side where a lot of people can chip in and things could go in their favor. I'm really hoping that they can get out into an early go of it in the series and at least give us something good. Now, Boston is going to be a little bit more of an interesting talk here, as this is a team that made a big improvement. They went from 76 points to 100 points this year, and of course now get back into the playoffs. This is a team that, while they have guys that are a little bit more experienced, as I apologize, my wife's clinic cat, that's a munchkin cat, is running around like crazy. For those of you who don't know, a munchkin cat's like 5 inches tall, so yes, it's just running around. Anyway, back to the Bruins. They do have guys like David Pastrnak that's played nearly 100 games, I believe, in playoff action. However, this is a group that, if they really want to win, it may not necessarily be all Pasta. I think the battle is going to be primarily at 5-on-5 play. If they can keep things kind of close there, I actually think the advantage really runs heavily for them in this series. Jeremy Swayman is the best goalie in this series in particular. I think he's one of the better goalies in the Eastern Conference for the playoffs. And then obviously a guy that really just, has had those high highs in his career. So for the Bruins, this is really the make or break of, you have had some close games with the Sabres. I believe they've won 2 out of the 4 games that they played each other against in the regular season. Those games had 2 as well that went in overtime. Boston may have just won 1 of those, but there is a potential for them to move on. However, I think I'm going to go Buffalo here. I don't know. Usually I'm somebody that's kind of a dinosaur, and I like to wait and see how teams do before I kind of get gutsy and pick them if they haven't proven anything to me. But for Buffalo to be on such a hot run, to have a group that is as deep as they are, and to just kind of see what we've seen from them for a prolonged period of time, that's proof enough for me. And I do think that in a way, maybe I'm a little biased, and I do show a little bit of a soft spot for teams that I kind of am rooting for. And in this case, I don't really feel bad admitting that I'm rooting for Buffalo in this series compared to the Bruins. The Bruins have won a Stanley Cup back in 2011. They've been to multiple. They've had deep runs. Buffalo hasn't had anything in a while, and I do think that they should advance on to the second round. Now, the Tampa Bay-Montreal series, I think, may be the most entertaining in the first round. Tampa Bay has not seen Montreal in the playoffs since their 2021 Stanley Cup final clash, where, of course, the Habs, while being an exciting story, were no match for the Lightning as they disposed of them in 5 games. And then for Tampa Bay, of course, they would go on to the Stanley Cup final the following year, looking to three-peat, but they lose to the Colorado Avalanche. Then after that, you have 3 straight successive years of losing in the first round. You kind of wonder where things are headed for the Bolts. They've made moves to try to continue to be good. However, they are a side that's still kind of looking for answers. Yes, this is their best season that they've had in like 3 or 4 years in regular season terms, but they are a side that's geared more towards the playoffs. However, it's kind of an old money versus new money feel, but vice versa in some ways. So old money, Montreal, successful for a very long time. New money, the Bolts coming in, being a relatively young side in NHL terms, but seeing recent success. But then if you look at the rosters, Tampa Bay's had guys that have been there and done that. Meanwhile, the Habs are kind of flipped, which I think does make it an interesting thing here. But really, for me, the focal point in this series, and I know a lot of times people are going to say, oh, yep, he's been gone for nearly a year, but he comes back and he's, harping about goaltending again. Andrei Vasilevskiy is going to be the biggest factor in this series, and I think for him, this is kind of a statement series, if you will. He has posted a goal saved above average total of negative 9.8, so basically an average goalie would have allowed 10 fewer goals in the past 3 years in the playoffs compared to him, a save percentage that is below 900. Just really brutal numbers, across the board. And it's tough for a guy that's seen so much regular season and playoff success, but I would like to think that he'd get a little bit more respect going in his way if they have a good series this round, and it'd be big for them because I think the real question is, what happens here if Tampa Bay loses again in the first round? Being a good regular season side only does so much when you're trying to win it all, maybe for the last time in a while. Now for the Canadiens, this is a really exciting season, probably the most exciting since when they had a really strong year in 2015. This is a group that has guys that were part of that 2021 Stanley Cup final loss, so they might want a little bit of revenge. But aside from that, it does feel a little bit different. Again, this is young, this is fresh, this is something where you kind of get romantic about where the potential of Montreal could be in the future. Cole Caulfield, 50-plus goal season. Nick Suzuki cracking the 100-point mark list. That is all incredible. I think this is a side that, handled some situations pretty well this year. The whole Patrick Laine thing is kind of awkward. But things have gone well, and it is fun to see. I do think that the NHL is in a much better spot when the Habs are in the playoff conversation. Not just that, but they are in conversation of maybe going on a run. Montreal, for my lifetime, for the most part, hasn't been that, and I do think that they've just got a good group of guys, and I'm excited to see what happens here. They take on a Tampa Bay team that could get the best of them, absolutely, but they also are a group that's won their past 2 matchups against them. I don't really take a whole lot of stock into the regular season records because we've seen teams sweep teams in the regular season and then just kind of get whooped on. The Winnipeg Jets come to mind from a couple of years ago, and I do kind of wonder where all that falls in play. A big thing that's going to stick out here for me from Montreal is their shooting percentage is very high on the power play compared to the chances they generate. So what happens here if they get on a little bit of a cold streak during this run in the first round? Is it going to be the thing that sends them home? I don't know. They averaged a lot of minutes on the power play against Tampa Bay in the regular season, and they scored twice. Just kind of something to keep an eye out for, and a series that I think is going to be fun. I don't know who to trust here. I'm picking Montreal. I don't necessarily know if you want to call it an upset, mainly just because I feel like for Tampa Bay, we've heard this story before, and yes, I normally say, oh, it's about proving yourself, but Tampa Bay, in a sense, hasn't proven themselves in 3 years. Maybe it's 4. Now, as for the Carolina Hurricanes, Ottawa Senators series, this one is very odd, and for Carolina, this is a group that's been very successful. This is their 4th division title in the past 6 years, a side that just keeps on making the playoffs, a team that's got the best record in the East. However, it feels like there are some players that have played big roles for this team in recent years that maybe didn't play as big of a role. There's been some questions about how things are going to work for this team heading into the playoffs, especially if they are looking to go on another deep run, as they've already made it to the conference finals 3 years in Rod Brind'Amour's tenure. And, that's obviously been a whole other thing where there's been just abysmal runs. They've won 1 game out of a possible 13 in that stage. But kind of just circling back to where are we now? Peter Kochetkov is back in this first round. And you'd like to think that if he kind of gets going, this Canes team is going to be, again, a very, very big threat in an Eastern Conference that looks a little odd compared to what we've seen basically for a while now. And I think that this is where they could do pretty well. I saw Puck Empire kind of talking about his pick, where he thinks that the Ottawa Senators are going to upset the Canes here. And yes, you could probably say one way or another, looking at the games that Ottawa played against Carolina, where they had better expected goals percentage and won better more chances, if you will. However, Carolina in a 7-game series is going to be hard to match, and I do think they're going to get their chances, and if they get them more in their favor, it really could be huge for them, as the Senators have the 4th worst save percentage in the NHL at time of recording. Now, as for the Ottawa Senators, I really didn't think they were going to get here. At a certain stage, it looked like they were going to be put on the wayside. However, they did. That was thanks in part to some teams like the Red Wings and the Blue Jackets kind of teetering off, and some other sides, I think, of course, dealing with some major injuries this season. However, what you can say is that Ottawa did make the playoffs in back-to-back years, and this is a team that is going to try to take what they're given and make the most of their opportunities. This is a team that has good face-off percentages. This is a team that isn't afraid to get physical, and there are guys that I'm really hoping can have a big series. Sorry, got a little bit of a hiccup there. Anyway, as for somebody that I'd like to see have a big series and make an impact, maybe somebody like Dylan Cousins, there are some good players for Ottawa. That is absolutely a given, and despite all of the problems that they faced in net, they are here. However, even though, again, there are some reasons to kind of side with them, I don't want to necessarily make it seem like, oh, it's kind of a slam dunk for Carolina. However, they've proven to be a pretty consistent team that at least goes on to the second round quite a bit in this era of consistency for them. And Ottawa, I've just not really been too confident in, even when they have made the playoffs. So for me, I'm picking the Hurricanes here. I don't think it's too crazy to say. Honestly, for what everybody's kind of brought up and kind of had counter arguments, I would be pretty surprised if the Hurricanes don't beat them. Not saying that it couldn't be a better series than what we expect, but yeah, for me, the Canes are probably going to move on. Now, as for the Battle of Pennsylvania, another series that you get pretty excited about, talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, the team that makes the playoffs for the first time since 2020. This is a group that, I'm going to be honest, even if I had been putting out videos, I don't really think I would have expected to make the postseason. However, a lot of things went their way. They ended up having the most wins that they've had since 2012, I believe. And granted, the COVID-shortened year, 2019-20, they would have definitely passed that. But regardless, this was a pretty good season, all things considered. Tocchet being in charge of this side. You saw them, of course, get a guy like Trevor Zegras, Big Z, where he's able to play like a full season after having some injury issues with Anaheim. And that is great. You've got some other guys as well, like Dan Vladar, that I think is going to play a massive, massive part in this series on a very cheap, team-friendly contract that could be, again, one of those pickups where you say, you know, interesting, and I'm kind of surprised. Dan is younger than I thought he was. I feel like, for me, I imagine him being like 4 or 5 years older than he is. But anyway, just kind of going to him, he is probably the guy that you would say could have the best series in the net for either team. Curious to see how that goes. I do think that Philadelphia is going to be a fun one because they're pretty hot to finish out the year, winning 6 out of their past 7. They have got a group of castaways, if you will. And not only that, I feel like some of these castaways are not only trying to revive their careers or bounce back. I really do think that if things go well, they could fit into Philly's culture. They are going to face a daunting task trying to beat the Penguins, which is a team that, while not necessarily being as good as in recent years, or I should say, you know, farther away than recent years, they still have some players you have to worry about. But for the Flyers, you know how it is. I feel like the culture still kind of remains intact, and they could pose a serious threat to the Pens moving on. Now, as for the Penguins, this is going to be a team that's kind of interesting as they make the playoffs for the first time since 2022. They had been a mainstay for a while, of course, winning 3 Stanley Cups and making it to another one back in 2008. However, you know, it's been a minute since they've gone on a run. These guys are a little bit older, but there still is some youth. Ultimately, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting here is you do have some really old guys on the blue line. I don't want to say really old, but they've got some age, they've got some miles on them that are probably going to be an X factor in this series that are going to try to protect their young goalies. You've got Shilovs and Stuart Skinner. This is where I'm going to be thinking this could kind of be the deciding factor. Not that it really all relies on the blue line, but if you are thinking about breakaway opportunities or just trying to protect those young goalies that might be a little bit sensitive to having bad games, this is going to be something where you say we have to step up. Stuart Skinner is somebody that I think can get hot, but I don't really know how it's going to work for the entirety of the playoffs. I'm going to be honest. I don't think Pittsburgh, even if they win this series, goes on to the next round. Now, that being said, I do think we're probably going to see both of these goalies in this series, and there are some other young guys as well too, including a rookie that is wearing a special number, number 81 for the Penguins. Phil the Thrill wore that number, and of course is a 2-time Stanley Cup champion, so I'd like to see him do pretty well. But the Penguins in general, I think for this series, are kind of poised to be the favorites, not just because of the experience, not just because of the names, but the fact that they can just score a little bit easier. And I know people kind of talk about, oh, well, what happens if it turns into a slugfest? It very well could. But I think over the final 3 regular season games that the Pens and the Flyers played against each other, the Penguins scored 14 goals. If the Pens average that many goals per game, I feel pretty confident saying that they could go out there and win this series. That being said, a lot of people have been talking about, okay, what happens if they get into a really long game? Maybe, it could very well factor into Philadelphia going out and winning this series. But I just trust the the Penguins a little more. So yeah, that's my Eastern Conference kind of series previews. Nothing too big. Obviously, of course, I'm kind of a little bit more busy now, as I said. But I have the Sabres, I have the Habs, I have the Hurricanes and the Penguins, but we'll see what happens here in the first round of the Eastern Conference, and I want to kind of know, what are your thoughts? Who do you think will win? Let me know down below in the comments, and also please make sure to like and subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe, have a great night, and you go hockey all right.